if you're concerned that your child has issues with, spatial awareness, getting lost in space, banging into things, seeming a bit clumsy, not having a good sense of themselves, maybe poor confidence, self-esteem, if you're noticing that your child is finding it very hard to be calm and regulated and gets dysregulated or upset and has meltdowns easily, this could be the video for you. Today I want to talk to you about the proprioceptive sense. So the proprioceptive sense is very interesting, and it's often linked with the vestibular sense, which we've spoken about in the vestibular video, and the vestibular sense is all to do with movement and balance. But that proprioceptive sense is kind of inextricably linked with the vestibular sense in terms of movement and balance. It can be hard to separate out what's doing what, because the proprioceptive part is the part that's giving you lots of good information about where am I in space, okay? Am I sitting here, okay? Am I outside? It's my proprioceptive sense that tells me it's all to do with the movement of my muscles and joints. It's the sense that helps me to stay calm. It's the sense that when I go to the gym and I get lots of vestibular and proprioceptive input, heavy work from my body, it feeds into my proprioceptive sense and is very calming. So the proprioceptive is very interesting and very important. It can impact on a lot of areas. In particular, it can impact on the spatial end of things. Where am I in space? And that analogy that Steve J. Cool that I spoke about before in terms of, the shopping mall map, and here's the dot for here you are. And if you don't know where you are, how do you know where anything is in relation to you? Okay, so we spoke a little bit about Theo in the vestibular video, so that might be worth having a little bit of a look at because it ties in here with this proprioceptive sense. So it's to do with spatial awareness, to do with visual spatial, it's to do with regulation, staying calm, it's to do with my sense of myself. I often find that children who have poor proprioceptive feedback are the kids who don't have a good sense of themselves. Who am I? Where do I fit into the world? They're often the kids who have the issues language-wise with concepts like he and she, him and her, funnily enough. And they would have issue with concepts like all of the spatial concepts, under, behind, beside, all of that. They find them more difficult to learn in the beginning. So there's a lot of things that the proprioceptive sense gets into. But what I love about the proprioceptive sense is that it's the sense that really works with all the other senses in terms of helping your nervous system to stay calm. So the proprioceptive sense is all about, a lot of it is to do with spatial awareness, but also how do I stay calm. Now, funnily enough, with the proprioceptive sense, a little bit different to the other senses, we often don't talk about proprioceptive seeking or proprioceptive avoiding. We just don't. What we tend to do instead is we look to see if there's spatial issues related to the proprioceptive sense and work on those. And I'm going to talk to you about how we do that. But we also look at the regulation end of things because it's the proprioceptive sense that is very calming to the nervous system and helps, for any children who are getting overexcited or who have meltdowns or who become very dysregulated very easily, they need lots of proprioceptive input. So how do we get proprioceptive input? Well, again, if you take a look either at my DVD, Speech and Language Therapy for Your Child, A New Way of Learning and Thinking, we have lots of lovely ideas there in terms of how your child can get proprioceptive input as well. I've spoken a lot about it in my book, my new edition ebook, and I'm going to put a link in the box below. And that is Unlocking Your Child's Potential. Music is the key. So lots of nice ideas there. And we're also going to put a link below so that you can see the specific activities that help your child to be calmer and more organized and have better spatial integration. But in terms of helping your child to be calmer from a proprioceptive point of view, you're looking really at activities that help me to be grounded, more organized. So what kind of things are they? Well, we mentioned a few of them earlier, I think in relation to a particular child, jumping on a hippity-hoppity ball, or a space hopper as it's sometimes called, but the child landing with their 2 feet on the ground, okay? So they're getting a lovely joint compression up through the ankle, the knee and hip, which is very calming. Other activities would be, and again, you just need to bear in mind here, and you need to be mindful, I suppose, the age of your child and their ability and all of that kind of thing, and take that into account with the various activities and make your own decision about what's suitable for your child. But, you know, if your child's a little bit older, maybe 4 years and up and able, lying across a gym ball, okay, and moving their hands on the ground and then coming back. So they're getting lovely joint compression up through the arms, which is very calming, very organizing for the body. The other thing can be, you know, climbing up a little bit of an incline, can give lots of resistive movement to the body. Swimming can be great. Horse riding can be very good. In terms of the proprioceptive end of things, yeah, wearing a little bit weighted backpack, of course, keep in mind your own child's weight and all of that. And I always think with the little weighted backpack, she might have a few books in it to give a little bit of a weight. Okay, sometimes people talk about weighted vests and things like that. I'm not a huge fan of those kind of things because I think ultimately they're compensatory activities, and I would much prefer that we remediate what's happening and resolve it so the child is just doing better. So yes, initially when some children come to me, they may be using weighted blankets or weighted jackets, things like that. But, you know, my focus is always on helping the child to be regulated from the inside out so they don't need those kinds of things. And I have to say in most cases, that's exactly what happens. They become regulated from the inside out, and so that they don't need that type of thing, okay? So the other thing that I'm thinking about, so they're just some activities there. From a spatial point of view, we've spoken a little bit about that already in the visual video. So I definitely recommend you take a little look at that. We spoke a lot about visual spatial. We spoke about Theo, the little boy who came in, you know, the speech therapist who had worked with him previously was concerned that he had autism, and certainly he presented very much like he did. However, there's often a differential diagnosis there, and this is what I'm seeing a lot. A lot of children are being misdiagnosed with autism, and I'm going to do a whole video on that because I think it's so important, and possibly even a series of videos. But a lot of children are being misdiagnosed with autism, and in fact what's really going on, because there's a very close differential diagnosis there, and it's often that the child has actually got dyspraxia. Okay, and you know, so they've underlying sensory processing difficulties, maybe find it hard to find you in the space visually, so they've got the poor eye contact. The language may not be developing because they've often got the low average muscle tone. Okay, so they may not be processing language in the way they should, or coming up with language the way they should. Okay, so these are two of the main characteristics, or they talk about the triad of challenges for children on the spectrum. They're two of them. But also children with dyspraxia or underlying sensory integration difficulties can present exactly, very, very similarly. And it really takes a trained eye, a really good clinician, to really see the difference. And most importantly, whoever is diagnosing autism or whatever the condition is should, in my experience, have a really good working knowledge of sensory integration. Because if they don't, how do they know that, you know, that this child really presents with autism? Could it not be dyspraxia with underlying sensory processing difficulties, and that once they're worked on in the correct way, the child just starts to move along that pathway as opposed to the pathway for autism? Okay, so that's certainly, you know, something just as an aside point, but I'm going to do a complete video on that, and I think probably a series of videos. And just to say to you, if there's any topic that, you know, that I bring up and that you want more information on, or you'd like another video on, please, you know, comment in the box below. Just send us a comment or whatever. And if there's a particular area you'd like to see covered in a video, we can certainly look at trying to do that for you. But just going back to the whole spatial end of things and Theo. So this is the proprioceptive sense again, and this is the part where it's, you know, it's so linked with that vestibular sense and hard to pull apart. So when he came in that day, so this is the little boy who came in, who the speech and language therapist who had worked with him previously felt that he was on the spectrum. His parents didn't agree. And so when I looked at him that day and interacted and engaged with him, when he presented initially, I was thinking, okay, there's lots of indicators here of both autism, but also dyspraxia. Okay, so I thought, let's just look at a number of things. So we tried lots of different activities, but it was really when he got into that box, and that box provided him with the boundaries that he didn't have in his own body because of the dyspraxia. And once he got, and it was actually a smallish box, we fit it in really nicely, but it gave him a lovely sense of himself. So once he got that, here I am, I've landed, then he was able to find us, me and his mum and his dad, in that space. So it all starts to become clear. And his interaction, his eye contact, everything changed once he had a better sense of space. Okay, so this just shows you what can really happen. And I've written about Theo in my book, Unlocking Your Child's Potential. Music is the key. So let's just think for a second, what, in my experience over the last 20 years, and I work with a lot of children who present with sensory integration difficulties. I work with a lot of children with complex communication needs, whether it be autism, dyspraxia, apraxia, global developmental delay, Down syndrome, you name it. Speech and language delay, there may be no diagnosis or there may be a diagnosis, doesn't matter. What I have seen, that, you know, we've talked about the tips and we're going to have a link to those below, but the things that make the biggest difference in terms of that proprioceptive sense, in terms of really pulling all of the sensory information together better, would be, yes, working with a person, whether it be, usually it's an occupational therapist, trained in sensory integration. Yes, I'm very lucky, I'm a speech and language therapist and I'm trained to an advanced level in sensory integration as well, but there's probably very few of us who are. So yes, if you can find a speech therapist who's trained in sensory integration as well, that's fabulous, or work with an OT on that end of things. But equally as important as that is that either the occupational therapist or speech and language therapist needs to be using a form of sound therapy, needs to be using sound therapy, so that they're actually impacting on the neuroplasticity of the brain. They're actually improving that child's spatial awareness. And I see this time and time again. I've seen children come completely full circle with the whole spatial awareness end of things. Children who are so lost in space that you think, oh my golly, how are we going to get them to, you know, really land and be grounded and be interactive and engaging? And we've done it. But we've done it via the sound therapy. So I would say, you know, the greatest thing that I can say to you from a therapy point of view, in my experience, that really sorts out the whole sensory end of things is the sound therapy. And whether that is starting with therapeutic listening or, you know, something like that, something non-intensive, and maybe moving something more intensive like the lift, or starting with the lift program. So for me, if you're concerned about anything that we've spoken about in relation to the sensory, and particularly now in relation to the proprioceptive sense, that vestibular sense, definitely I would be starting to look at the whole sound therapy end of things. And we're going to give links or leave links in the description box below so that you're going to be able to find therapists on a worldwide level trained in therapeutic listening and trained in the LIFT program. Okay, I hope this has been really helpful.